When it comes to rhythm, if you find yourself sort of more feeling it than actually knowing how it accurately goes, you have to hear somebody play it first to be able to play it accurately yourself, or you're just kind of following along in your band or ensemble rather than leading. You struggle with fast notes and you absolutely loathe the metronome, then you are likely falling into what I call the fake rhythm trap. And in this video, I'm going to explain what that is and how to avoid it. My name is Josh Gu, and I'm taking my years of experience learning, teaching, and performing, and sharing all of my best clarinet and music tips so you can get more out of your practice, and most importantly, have fun. You can learn more about all of my many resources at QuickStartClarinet.com, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to get notified when I post new videos. I have worked with so many students that find the metronome to just be utterly frustrating, who find that when it comes to rhythm, it's just sort of this mysterious thing that usually you can get fine when you're playing with other people, but if you ask them to figure out how the rhythm works on their own, it's a complete train wreck, and it's really hard to actually figure that out. And these people have said things like, oh, I'm just not coordinated enough to have good rhythm, I'm not talented enough. And I bet you can relate to those feelings of you hear people playing around you and you're like, oh my gosh, how are they playing these fast notes? How are they getting these tricky rhythms and actually getting it to fit in? And like, I have no idea how this goes. I'm just sort of hanging on for dear life. Or on the other side of things, maybe you've been in those positions where the people around you are just totally faking it and maybe even throwing you off because they're doing such weird things with their rhythm and maybe not following as well as they should. All of these things fall into what I call rhythm fakers. These are the people who are kind of faking it or feeling it when it comes to rhythm. And it's a very, very common thing that happens where we sort of rely on our inner recording and just sort of playing how it goes or how we think it goes, and we don't know how to actually sit down and break down the music and count it out accurately and then make that counting into accurate rhythms. I bet a lot of you who are rhythm fakers actually know how to count things and you can write in the counting above the notes pretty accurately, but there's still like a missing component to go from, okay, I play 1 and 3 for yanda, and turning that from that counting into an actual rhythm. And that missing step, I really think, is in large part the fake rhythm trap. So let's talk about exactly what the fake rhythm trap is and where it comes from. So what the fake rhythm trap is this idea and this issue where you understand note values and you can sort of see how the notes fit in the measure and you can count them, but you can't actually turn them into music. And that's why you hate the metronome so much. That's where the frustration of the metronome comes in, is because you're trying to play your note values, but you have this sort of obnoxious click going on at the same time, and figuring out how to combine that click with what you're actually doing is where you have problems. And the reason why you have these problems is because you were actually taught rhythm wrong in the first place, which we'll get into in a second. But before we do that, just to be really clear on what the fake rhythm trap actually is it's where you're trying to play your rhythms and trying to keep track of your note values independent from the steady beat. And that's the trap of it. What this will feel like, especially when it comes to playing with the metronome, is you'll turn the metronome on and you'll be like, okay, I know what that steady beat is. I'm trying to hear that recording in my head of how this rhythm goes at that steady beat. And then I'm going to start and I'm going to try to play the same speed as the metronome. And if I'm doing it correctly, then I'll end up with the metronome either at the end of the measure, at the end of the chunk you're playing, maybe even at the end of the piece where you're just sort of feeling it, faking it the whole time, and hope that that last cutoff of the conductor you end up landing with. And I think it's pretty easy to fall into the fake rhythm trap, especially with the way we're traditionally taught how rhythm works, because that's kind of what it feels like the metronome is doing, is the metronome's kind of setting your pace, and then you go at that pace. But the way that true rhythm actually works and the way to have true rhythm mastery is very, very different from that. It's not just that the metronome's setting the pace and you go at that pace. It's much more about connecting to the beat and checking in with it and anticipating where that next click of the metronome's going to be, which we'll definitely go into a lot more in depth. But I also want to talk about where this comes from and how we were actually taught rhythm wrong and incorrectly that led to the fake rhythm trap. If you think of music as being similar to a language and rhythm being sort of a language in and of itself within music, the most natural way to learn it would be the way that we learn a native language. And this is the way that music learning theory proposes that we should learn all of music, very similar to a native language, where we start by hearing it and then speaking it and sort of doing it. Then we go on to reading and writing it. But if you think about when you learned rhythm, you probably started with learning a whole note is 4 counts, a half note is 2 counts, a quarter note gets 1 count, etc., and seeing the visual symbols of these rhythms and how many beats they get and how all of that works. And that's not hearing it, that's not speaking it, that's reading it and that's writing it, and that's the last step. So I really think when we teach rhythm that way by showing the note values first is basically the equivalent of putting a book in front of an infant, teaching them how to sound out the letters, and then hoping that they learn to speak whatever language that book is written in. And if that's how you were taught rhythm, that is why it's so frustrating, and especially why playing with the metronome is so frustrating, because you're trying to sound out the letters and trying to make sense of how long a half note is, a quarter note, and luckily those are easy, but what if you had a dotted eighth note or a double dotted quarter note, and you're trying to comprehend, okay, how long is this note within the measure, and then how long is the next note, and how long is the next note, and as you're trying to sort of sound out those letters, the steady beat is just passing you by, the band is rushing on, and you're left falling behind. So what is the antidote to the fake rhythm trap? Well, I call it True Rhythm Mastery, which is also the name of my rhythm course, which you can learn more about at quickstartclarinet.com/rhythm. And one of the core components that I teach throughout the course, one of many different rhythm things to help you truly master rhythm, is this idea of going from reading note values, where you're basically sounding out every single letter of the rhythm, and turning that into reading it as words, and not just reading it, but reading it the way that you would speak a language, reading it the way that you hear a language, and understanding the deeper context of that rhythm and that note value in that specific time signature, so that you can actually execute these things with much, much more confidence and make it a lot more automatic, where you can see a rhythm pattern and know how it fits in the beat and actually comfortably and confidently line it up with the metronome. And that's really the key to true rhythm mastery, is going from reading note values to connecting to the steady beat. And that's why the metronome is so important, and why probably every teacher ever has told you that you should practice with the metronome, even though they may or may not have told you how to actually practice with the metronome. But the reason why you should is because we need that connection to that steady beat. And when we are connecting to the steady beat and we can see beyond just the note values of the rhythm and start to see it as the context of how that rhythm fits into the steady beat and connects to the metronome, that's when we begin to truly master rhythm. Now you're probably asking, how does this actually work? Okay, I kind of get the idea that I should not be sounding out each note value and need to start connecting to the steady beat, but what does that actually look like? Well, let me jump over to my computer and I'll actually show it on a musical example so you can start to get an idea of what this means to connect to the beat and start getting towards true rhythm mastery and away from the fake rhythm trap. All right, here is the second movement of the Mozart Clarinet Concerto, which I think is arguably like the most famous piece for the clarinet ever. And if we have that sort of way we're traditionally taught, thinking in note values, thinking of rhythm as sort of sounding out the note values, then even something that on the surface level seems like it should be pretty simple can start to get really complicated. Even looking at the very first measure, we start with a quarter note and then a dotted quarter note. So the quarter note's no problem. We know that that's one beat. So we do 1, and then we get to 2. But 2 being a dotted quarter note, we have to first of all remember what a dot actually means. And I think if you're working in this sort of true rhythm mastery sense, you almost don't even need to know what a dot means. Every time I use the double dotted example, I always have to take a second and think about how long is a double dotted quarter note actually. And I always figure it out by working backwards from the true rhythm mastery way. But a dotted quarter note, conceptually, we know is 1.5 times the note value. It's better to think of that as 3 halves. So half of a quarter note is an eighth note. So we have 3 eighth notes in this dotted quarter note. And by the time you've processed that and sort of sounded out what that note value actually even means, then you're going to be way behind, and it's just going to take so much bandwidth to try to process how long that note is. And I bet most of you don't process notes like that. What you do is you play quarter, dotted quarters a little longer, eighths are quarter, eighths are fast, and then the quarter note's a whole beat. And then continuing on to the next measure, we are again thinking in note values, and we see, okay, dotted quarter note, that's a little bit longer than a quarter note. And then, are these triplets? Are these eighth notes? We have 3 of them beamed together, so they could be triplets, but there isn't a 3 written there. So again, we don't know for sure how long those notes are. Maybe we can hear the recording in our head and know that it goes dum, ba, dee, 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 dum, dum. That was the wrong notes I sang, but you get the idea for the rhythm. And all of that is fake rhythm because you're just estimating sort of how long things are. And when we integrate the context of the steady beat, that's when this starts to become really clear that these are in fact eighth notes and not triplets. It becomes clear how to actually line up those eighth notes and play them steadily and start them at the right time and play them at the right speed, rather than just estimating, okay, a dotted quarter note's 3 eighth notes. This is 3 eighth notes, so 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, something like that, where you're just estimating and faking it. And that's why I call it rhythm fakers. That's why I call it the fake rhythm trap, because you're feeling the rhythm and trying to think, okay, this note's a little longer, this note's a little shorter. And on something simple like this, you might be able to get away with that. Especially this is such a famous and popular melody that you might be able to work through that and get pretty darn close. But when we get further into the piece and start looking at something like this measure, then you're going to be in trouble, because first of all, we have a tie, a quarter note tied to a 16th note. So, okay, I'm feeling a quarter note plus a little bit longer, then 32nd notes, I guess that's just as fast as possible, right? And then 16th notes, I think I can feel 16th notes, but after the 32nd notes, it might be a little tricky, and only the last 16th notes of the beat, and then trying to get that to land at the next downbeat. And that's where you're going to put this with the metronome and trying to feel it that way. You'll get something like dee ba da 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 dee da ba da. I'm not sure if I'm lining up with the metronome. Everything's off and discombobulated and really frustrating. So that's all the fake rhythm trap. That's all sort of way rhythm fakers figure out this kind of rhythmic stuff. The way to actually do it, the true rhythm mastery way, is to integrate the context of the steady beat. And in this case, when we have very fast subdivisions, you'll want to be thinking of an eighth note steady beat in these particular examples. But before I go into that, let me actually go back to the beginning and explain how this steady beat stuff works. So the context of the steady beat is looking at the rhythms not as approximate lengths of the notes. You don't need to think about lengths of notes hardly at all if you're doing rhythm properly. What you need to think about is where is the next beat and how does the rhythm relate to that beat. The way that I like to think about it is there's sort of this underlying grid of the time signature, and then we're putting the rhythm into that, whether it's half note sort of takes up these 2 beats, and then there's an eighth note on the beat 3 and an eighth note here. It's somehow fitting into the grid of the rhythm. And the way to mark that in the music, and this is what most professionals will mark in their music when they're needing to mark in rhythmic things, are slashes for where the beats are. So starting here at the beginning, we have 1, 2, and then we have beat 3 is here before this eighth note, and then beat 1 is here, beat 2, beat 3. Same thing here, 1, 2 is before this eighth note, and then that eighth note's on beat 3, and then 1, 2, 3. And again, professionals wouldn't mark in this many beats, but they might do 1 slash somewhere, maybe after the dotted quarter note, to show like, okay, there's beat 2, so I'm playing after beat 2, leading to beat 3, maybe something like that. But I'm marking in all of the beats to give you an idea of what we're aiming for and how we're connecting to the beat. And now when we start comprehending these rhythms, not as note values, where we're sort of gonna, okay, figure out what the pace of the note values are and hope that I stay that pace as the metronome is going sort of in parallel. Now we're not even worrying about note values. We're thinking about how do those notes and those rhythms fit into the beat. So I know where those beats are, and I can anticipate where that next click of the metronome is going to be. And then I can place those rhythms in relationship to that. 1, 2, 3, and 1, and 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3, and 1, and 2. So I'm thinking about every single one of those notes that line up with the beat are landing with the click. And then, because I've practiced subdivisions and I'm familiar with rhythms, I know how those upbeats and those subdivisions fit in between. So that's how that works on something simpler like the beginning, but the same approach applies to the more complicated stuff. And again, we're going to go with an eighth note subdivision here. So we do eighth, 1, and 2, and then you have to know a little bit about how 30-second notes work and how to count rhythms and note values to figure out where the next beat is. But even if this is tricky, a quick little tip is you can actually work backwards from the end of the measure. So thinking in eighth notes, I know 2 16th notes are an eighth note. So this is the and of 4. 2 16th notes are an eighth note. This is beat 4. 2 16th notes are an eighth note. This is the and of 2. Sorry, this is beat 3. And of 3, 3, and of 2. And then I know this is 2 because we have 1 and 2. So now I know where things are lining up, and I didn't even need to figure out exactly how the note values of 30-second notes work. Now I can see this rhythm as we play 2 beat 2, we line up with beat 2, the click of the metronome, and then we play those 2 fast 30-second notes as an upbeat to the and of 2. And now these 30-second notes aren't just arbitrary, super fast notes, fastest subdivision you've ever played. Now they actually have context and actually fit into the beat. So this measure is 1, and 2, and a 3, and 4. Sorry, wrong counting numbers again. And actually, again, the numbers don't even have to be right as long as you're connecting it to the steady beat correctly. But let me do it with the right numbers so that you have that for sure. So it's 1, and 2, and a 3, E, and a 1. So that's how those fit in. Again, I'm not even singing close to the right notes, but you get the idea of how the rhythm fits. We have 2, and a, and 2, and a 1. And it takes what looks like a really complicated rhythm that your only hope is to just estimate where things are supposed to be and play, okay, a little longer than a quarter note, really fast, 16, 16, 16, 16, 16th quarter. And instead of worrying about those note values and having to comprehend how those note values relate to each other, we can now just connect it to the beat. And that's how you should be doing every single rhythm that you ever come across. And that's what's going to take you from being a rhythm faker, where you're just kind of feeling it and playing approximately the recording in your head of how you think it goes, or how you've heard somebody else do it before, or if this was a band piece, following along with the people around you and hoping that they're getting it correct. And instead you start moving to a true rhythm master, where you can read the beat of the metronome, you can read the beat of the conductor, and know how your rhythms actually fit into that. All right, I hope that that was helpful and gives you some ideas to start unlearning the fake rhythm trap. This is really just the tip of the iceberg, or maybe the foundation of the iceberg, but there's still a whole iceberg when it comes to rhythm things. Unlearning the fake rhythm trap and starting to connect to the steady beat is going to be incredibly powerful, but in the full True Rhythm Mastery course, there's so much more about time signatures and how the inflection of time signatures works. There's exercises to actually start connecting to the beat and start internalizing the beat stronger. We go really in depth with counting, so you can identify the counting for any rhythm that you come across. And I go over the 5-step True Rhythm Mastery system, which is 5 steps that you can go through on any rhythm to make sure that you're understanding the time signature really well, you're understanding the rhythm really well, and most importantly, getting how that rhythm connects to the beat. And then there's an entire module in there where we actually practice this on real musical examples and go through and see, okay, this is whatever music we're looking at with some tricky rhythms in there. We're going to apply the 5-step system. This is how you go through it. Now you know how to count that. And the cool thing about rhythm, and especially when you start seeing it in the context of the steady beat, is as you encounter a specific rhythmic pattern, you can build that into your automatic library of rhythm patterns. So the next time you see that in another piece, even if it's at a different tempo or at a slightly different context, you can automatically know that's that rhythm, this is how it connects to the beat, and then you can perform it automatically. And speaking of that, there are actually some awesome bonus workshops that I'm adding to the True Rhythm Mastery course. This is going to be 3 live workshops that I'm doing on April 19th, 20th, and 21st of 2024. So if you are watching this before then you still have a chance to attend those workshops live. The first one is going to be about building out your automatic rhythm library and sort of going more in depth with exactly how to take a rhythm pattern and turn it into an automatic rhythm that you'll be able to play in any context at any tempo. The second one is going to be about how to use the metronome to master the fast notes and stop having fast finger freak out. And it's not just the start slow and comfortable and then gradually increase the tempo, because I actually don't do that often in my practice, and I found that there's some more effective ways to work on really getting the tempo and achieving the speeds that you want through the power of leaning into the rhythm, connecting to the beat, and actually using the metronome as a helpful tool. And then the third workshop is going to be hot seats and Q&A. So if you're able to attend live, you can bring whatever tricky rhythm things that you're struggling with, and we'll actually unpack them, work through them. I'll show you how to approach them using the True Rhythm Mastery system, and I'll sort of see where you're at with your rhythm fundamentals and maybe give you some exercises to work on that will be beneficial for you as well. So if you want to attend those live workshops and you're watching this before April 19th, 2024, then go to quickstartclarinet.com/rhythm and enroll in True Rhythm Mastery and start taking your first steps to truly mastering rhythm. I hope this video has been helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'm wishing you the very best on your rhythm journey. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in another one. And last but not least, a huge heartfelt thank you to the Dennersons. This is like the QuickStart Clarinet family who supports the channel and helps to make everything that I do possible. If you would like to support the channel and get some awesome rewards in return where we can work one-on-one over video and you can have my full support moving forward on your clarinet journey, then go to quickstartclarinet.com/supporter.